Hello, how you doing? Nice to be back again. My name's Scott MacArthur and this is Artefact, where we look at storytelling and we'll try very hard to break it down into the art and the science of storytelling. So nice to see people join me right away. That's lovely. Hello, folks. Hi. Hello on Facebook. Hi there. Hi on LinkedIn. Hello. Oh my goodness, that's good. It seems to be working. That's excellent. Right. So tonight, we're doing something tonight that as I've said before, these half-hour, 45-minute sessions are rarely enough and to cover everything. So tonight I see this as an introduction to what I've called the business of story. But it's something that I am quite passionate about, and it's something, as I've said to you before, I think if you understand this stuff, that it can make a fundamental change to you and to your organization. I'm astonished at how poor corporations are at this. I don't really think I could name one company who excels at storytelling. And that is extraordinary for a number of reasons. But let me just have a quick check in the chat, make sure someone let me know. Can you hear me? Are we working tonight? We've had fun with this in the past. I think everything's working. It looks like it is. It's certainly saying it is. But if someone could just let me know if we're working or not, that would be very, very helpful. I'll just nip over to Periscope and see how that's doing. That's doing fine. So, okay. So last week, hold on, just let me get that, make sure this is working. That's it. So last week we looked at poetry and story, and I'm dead chuffed with the feedback. I'm glad you enjoyed the poetry, and I think I've created some Charles Bukowski fans and some David Whyte fans. And as I promised, I will come back to poetry again because it's such a powerful way of capturing moments. So I thought it would be interesting this week. Could someone let me know if the sound's working, please? Someone just pop it into the... There we go. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Joe. That's great. Thank you very much. I'm now feeling okay. It's just slightly flaky, particularly on LinkedIn. So thank you, Doug, in particular there. The LinkedIn engine is still in beta, and boy, can you tell. I don't know if anyone else is using it, but it's fun. But what I thought I would do, I thought I would use David Whyte as a bridge from the world of moments, which is the world of poetry, to the world of business. Now, David doesn't do a lot of work in business. He talks at events, but poetry isn't something that we don't have, chief poetry officers. I wish we did. But David's done some work, and there's a particular poem he wrote for one of the airliners, and I want to read it to you because I think it forms a nice bridge and enables us to get into this subject, because I know a few of you have got real issues with communications, etc., and particularly given that more and more of us are now working from home. So let me just show you this poem. This poem is called Working Together, and this, as I say, was written for Boeing, actually. It's a few years now. He was commissioned to piece to try and help Boeing people see where they were going. Business was all. Let me read it to you. I'm sure some of you are reading it to you. So this thing together by David Whyte. Shape ourselves to fit this world. By are shaped again. That first two says that's first sentence. We shape ourselves, fit this world, and by the world again. Visible and the invisible working together in a common to produce the miraculous is a lot, I think. Thinking of the way the air passes at speed, a shaped wing easily holds our weight. So may we trust those elements we have yet to imagine and look true shape of our self by forming it well, by forming to the tangibles about. So that was a poem written by the Yorkshire poet. He calls himself Yorkshire Irish, but he's born in Yorkshire, poet David Whyte. And I think, I like it. I think I'll put it back on, sorry. There's a couple of bits I particularly like, and I said, I was reading it, I like the first sentence, and it's really, he's done that deliberately. We shape ourselves to fit them, by the world are shaped again. In other words, what we working at Boeing are working has an impact, and what they were doing at Boeing has an impact on the lives of the people that work there. So I think that's quite a nice bridge into what we're going to talk about this week. Now, the thing that I said, right at the beginning was that I was surprised about how poor organisations are at storytelling. Now, those of you who have tuned in to previous shows know that one of my favourite phrases in this world is that facts tell, but stories sell. And it's just true. But it's astonishing how few people actually understand it. And I'm going to tell a story that some of you may have heard me tell before, and I'm making no apologies for it, because it's a powerful one. And it's one that I think really, really helps us understand the problem here. So what I'd like you to do, I want you to come on a little journey with me, just a little imaginary journey. So this is not one of my own stories. This is a story from somewhere else. So one day you're in the office and you're not feeling very good. You've got a temperature, you've got you've got palpitations. You're just, and you feel a bit grotty. So you think, well, I better go to the doctor. So you make an appointment to see your doctor, and you go in to see her, and she looks at you, and in true doctor style, she says, "Oh, you don't look very good. We better do some tests." So she proceeds to do some tests. She does your blood pressure, and she takes your temperature and all the rest of it, and she sends those things off for some analysis. So you go back to the office. You have a reasonably rough night. You get up and you're tired, but you go into work, and you get there at 9 o'clock, and the phone rings, and it's the doctor's receptionist. So how are you feeling right now? Tell me, how would you be feeling right now if this was you in real life? Tell me, folks. Tell me how you would feel right at this very minute. Just take the opportunity while you're thinking about it to check that I'm not missing any comments here. We're okay. Magic. Great. So how would you feel? Well, I know how I would feel. I'd feel pretty worried. And so she goes on and she says, again in true doctor style, and I think things might be changing in this front, but in true doctor style, she says, "I'm afraid to say you've got a pretty serious heart condition, and it's so serious that you are probably going to die from it. It's that serious." Oh, deep breath, and you think, okay, what am I going to do? But then she says this. She says, "Look, there is something you could do that could actually help. It could help you." Oh, hello, Peter. Thanks for coming. It could help. You've missed the beginning of this story. There is something you could do that would really, really help. And that something is you could go on an extreme vegan diet. Now, not the normal vegan diet. This is a vegan diet where all you're allowed to eat is green leaves. So you've got a choice. You either die from this heart condition, or you change to a extreme vegan diet. So ask yourself now, would you change your diet? Tell me, you can write it in the box if you like, but would you change your diet? If your doctor said to you, if you don't change your diet to this diet, you're going to die, would you change your diet? I'll sit back and watch. I know you've heard it before, Peter, so don't say anything and spoil it. I know you're a comedian, but let's not spoil it. The reality is, and you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, I would change my diet. The reality is you probably wouldn't. And in fact, I didn't make the story up, as I said at the start. That story comes from a very well-respected physician in the States who looked at 10,000 people who happened to have this particular type of heart disease. And only 1 in 9 people chose to change their diet. Only 1 in 9 people chose to change their diet. So, they chose basically, rather than live, they chose to die because they just weren't prepared to change their diet. It was too difficult. True story. There's now over 100,000 data points, and it's still around about 9 or 10% that are prepared to change. So I think that says a lot about human beings, because if they're not going to change to save their lives, I know some of you are in from the big consultancy businesses this week, do you really think people are going to change because you're putting a new SAP or Oracle system in? Really? When they wouldn't change to save their lives. So think on that, and I'll just check the comments. Here's, oh dear, no cause to keep going because there'll be no good life in that diet. Joe, that's very pessimistic. Peter's saying it, I won't spoil it, so that's nice of you, mate, I know. But thank you very much. Well, I think it's interesting because there's an awful lot of effort put in by organisations to actually get us to change. And I think there's a problem with that because they keep doing it through introducing new systems, introducing new policies, introducing new rules, even worse, new regulations. What happens the minute you put regulations in? Everybody ignores them, or everybody breaks them. The more the regulations, the more people break them. And believe me, as an HR professional in full recovery, I have seen that in literally dozens of firms where people will just not change their behaviour. It doesn't matter what you say. in terms of policy, procedure, or rules, they'll just break the rules. And that's why companies like 3M have simplified the rule. I call it radical simplicity, where they've taken out all the rules and basically said to people, we trust you, and try to run their organization that way. But that's the size of the problem. It's very, very difficult for us to change. I think the reason for that, and it's this really, it's that stories are actually not something that have just appeared. Now, I said this in week 1, I said this in week 2, I think I said this in week 4 as well. Stories are part of what makes us human. And even before we could talk, we were using stories, we were using cave art, we were using tools and implements and to demonstrate to other people what was happening. And the reason for that was that we could talk, was we could empathize, we could understand what the story was, we could see that you were saying, the sun is high in the sky, at this point of the day, that means it's warm, therefore we need to go inside so we don't get sunburn. These are part of what we are. But again, I've said it before, I'm very surprised that companies don't do this. And I say this is, we need to go natural. We need to start thinking within business communications about, storytelling, because we are wired for story. Does that make sense? We are wired for it. Now, I did promise, and I will do it, not next week. I've got another plan for next week, but I'm going to do a biology session on this. I'm going to actually take you through some of the biology and some of the brain stuff. We don't know much, but the little bits we know that I think are pretty interesting in this area, I think could add some colour to this, because this is one area that has been quite well studied and there are some quite interesting perspectives on it. So I think what more companies need to do is go natural. They need to start telling stories to get across main points, major points, to get across how they want a business to change, develop, etc., etc. I hope that makes sense. And Joanne, I think you're pessimistic about that diet. Just sprinkle some salt on it. It might be okay. So today, what we're going to do, well, I'm going to, as I always do, I'm going to talk about some examples to try and help you bring this to life. I'll tell you some real ones from my own experience. I've also quite sneakily, and I think some of you may have suspected this, I've started to build a model, my own model around how people can remember how to build a story. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And that model, the word artifact is quite important for a number of reasons, but that model I hope will help you. But let me do something that might surprise you slightly, because I think where we need to begin with storytelling is not actually in the business world, and it's actually in the world of fiction. And on week 3, we talked about Shakespeare, and I've said this already today, but we are going to have a whole episode on Shakespeare and why his stories have been so, why they are so provocative and why they continue, 300-400 years after he's gone away. But the world of fiction gives us wonderful guidance on how we should be writing stories. Now, I'm not going to dive into the 11 or 12 steps, as I said 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were looking at what a story was. But what I will say is this. I'm really drawn, I need to take off that thing, hold on. I'm really drawn to this idea of using the structure from plays and from screenplays and from books, and having a 3-act structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end to a story. Now, so if you're writing a comms, or you're trying to change the relationship with a customer, or you're trying to develop the relationship with a customer, try to see if you can find stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, this is not just a joke. I know you've no doubt you've heard this before. The old one, which used to be taught, and it's gone out of fashion, and for a reason, because I don't particularly like it myself. It was tell them what you're going to say what you're going to say, then tell them what you've said. I'm not drawn to that. I guess that is crudely what this means, this beginning, middle, and end model, but I don't think it's actually what it means, and I will explain that in a moment. So this sort of structure, even for corporate communications, even for short corporate communications, can really help you make an impact. But how? So that would be your structure. But then to break it down, what I've done here, and I'll flick it onto the screen, is I've done this. Now, there's the word artifact. And I've started, now I've said this right from the start, that I think particularly in business, it's very important that we have evidence. It's very important that we think about evidence and we contain evidence in all our communications. That means it's different from writing a screenplay. That means it's different from writing even poetry in some ways. And I think evidence is critical when you're communicating corporately. That is an episode, a whole other episode, but that is the foundation in which all of this is built. Then we have the ARE, the art of storytelling at the top. And there are three things there that I would like us to think about. And I'm going to, as I say, I'm going to tell you stories. I'm going to delve into these. And we're going to see if I can show you some examples. And I'm going to give you some examples of how I've developed these stories and built them into my keynotes and my communication. But the first thing is association. Now, let me just put this off while I'm talking to you here because it's slightly unfair. So there's this idea of association. And this is about, there's no point in telling a story unless people can relate to it. They need to be able to, associate with you. They need to be able to associate with the story. They need to have some grounding in what you're trying to say to them in the corporate environment. So it makes it a bit different from telling a story, just an ordinary story, because you need to create that resonance. And this is where poor old HR gets a bashing quite often for this. They'll send out complex memos. They'll tell people that the numbers are like this and we're down these numbers, but remember the heart story. People just don't know how to relate to it. And even more interesting than that, people don't actually see the same as the HR department is trying to preach. And that's where I'm going to get you to do something really weird now. And it's something that virtual delivery is quite interesting, trying to do it virtually, but I'm going to ask you to suspend your disbelief just for a minute and do something for me that I think really gets this across. Now, I think a couple of my old KPMG and Atos colleagues are in today, so you'll have done this and seen me do this before. But let's just try this. I'd like you to close your eyes. Go on, close your eyes. The ones that are really taking part here will close their eyes. The other ones, boo. Anyway, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to imagine something with your eyes closed. And I would like you to imagine a dog. So you can see a dog. And I'd then like you to imagine that dog in a yard. So in your mind now, with your eyes closed, yes, you, Pete, a dog in a yard. So open your eyes. If you played along with me, I hope you did, because this is, I think, in all the years I've been working in this field, that exercise is the most important exercise you can ever do in any matter relating to customer services, communication, productivity. I just think I cannot think of a better exercise than that. It'll become clear in a minute why, but can you tell me what you saw? Is anyone willing to tell me what they saw? What dog in the yard they saw? Go on, I'll sit back, I might have a drink. What dog in the yard did you see? A poodle. Okay. What was it? Your poodle? This is anonymous friends on YouTube again. They're quite an interesting bunch. I don't know. I have no idea who it is. Well, I wouldn't do, I guess. So a poodle. Well, what else did people say? Tell me what you saw. I think there's a bit of a lag on Facebook tonight, which is a bit frustrating. A terrier, not seen it before. That's an interesting response. Who's that? That was Doug. Okay. And then here's Peter, my old Cocker Spaniel. God rest him. Oh, you big softy. Heather Wright, a lab in a garden, but it was an American garden. I wonder why. Now that exercise is particularly good. Now, if you do that with a large audience, it's really funny because you can guarantee, this is like you sort of full on Derren Brown stuff with this. This is an exercise that you can predict what most people are going to see. Not the specific animal, but you can predict, like most will see, like Peter did. They see something that they've had in their life. So their own dog, their parents' dog, their relative's dog. And just like Joanna's just said, sometimes it can be, a a Lassie type dog or a Dulux dog or a dog that's come from the television, because they're in their consciousness. Now, very few people can't do this exercise, but maybe 5% can't do it. But I think it's really important, because what people see is what they've experienced before. You can have great fun with this. Honestly, people think you're psychic because you've done it. But the word yard, and Heather has touched on it on Facebook, where she said about, I saw a lab in a garden, but it was an American garden. And that's because of the word yard. The word yard means different things in different parts of the world. So if you're in America, a yard tends to be a garden. But in the UK, well, certainly for me, a yard is like a builder's yard or a dirty yard with trucks and spades and shovels and things. So people get confused with that word, and I quite often get people, they maybe go down the coronation yard, quite often get that. But most of the time, folk jump to garden. They just assume a mean garden. So it's really interesting. But if you do this in Newcastle, a dog is a stubby of Newcastle Brown. In the States, they get really confused. A yard is still a length in old currency. They still talk in yards. And one of my favourite examples was I was working with 3 guys in Bristol, the Navy, and I did this exercise with an artist, and I got the artist to draw the dogs in the yards that they come up with. And the one guy drew a little Scotty dog because I was doing the presentation, but he drew it inside a yard of ale. So it was a dog in a yard. So it's quite fascinating that people, even with that simple exercise, there's Peter just saying, my dog was a terrace house. But yeah, I mean, it does make you sound like Darren Brown, doesn't it? Or our friend Mr. Mead, for those of you who know who David Mead is, the magician and mesmerist. But it is a very fun exercise. But guys, it is really, really important in the corporate world. Because if you can't get people to associate with what you're saying, can't actually get them to visualize, see, feel the same thing that you're trying to say, you've got no chance. And that's why over the few weeks that we've been doing this, I've used a lot of images, I've used a lot of video, because there is evidence that they tend to cut down what I call some of the noise when you're doing these sorts of things, when you're trying to communicate and relate to people. So that's the first thing, and probably the most important thing that I'll say today in terms of when you're building a corporate message, to make sure everybody, or at least the majority, are on the same page. Don't forget the dog in the yard. Does that make sense? I know it does. I love it. It's brilliant. I mean, it's one of the secret sauces of working with lots of companies. You get down to the nitty gritty and really understand what all the companies do. I feel so sorry for companies, because if I use like pure HR again, if I say, God forbid, strategy, and I want everybody to, we're not going to do this today, but what does the word strategy mean? Everybody sees it differently. Even things like you might think are easier, employee engagement. The reason the employee engagement movement has really stalled in the last 5 years, I mean, 10 years ago, it was rocking, but in the last 5 years, it's really stalled. And there's a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons is they can't agree on what it means. They can't get a dog in the yard. Now, they're still trying to work it through, but it's something that is really, really difficult. So in the corporate world, getting the association between your story and what you want people to feel, see, and emote with is extremely difficult. And I mean, I've done it in Olympic Games, I've done it in technology companies, I've done it in the arts, I've done it in I have to say, I've only just a few times got it right, because it is so difficult. Any questions on that, or observations on that? Any questions or observations? Peter says, I love that exercise. It's a real eye opener for an audience. Yeah, and I'm sure it's one that's been that's now echoing around a lot of the speaker circuits since I started to use it. I got it from a lady who was from Newcastle, actually, funny enough. Absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best exercises I've come across for this sort of thing. So let's go on to the next thing from this emergent model. The other thing that you need to think about in terms of corporate messaging is roles. Now, in the Joseph Campbell model, where you have heroes and villains, it's pretty clear. You have Saruman and Sauron against Gandalf and Frodo Baggins. The roles are fairly straightforward. But one of the things that I have experienced leaders really having difficulty with, mainly leaders, not so much, I mean, everybody does it, but it's usually leaders that are trying, and you guys are all trying to communicate with companies. One of the real difficulties they have is that word empathy. And I think part of that is because they forget what they're actually there to do. What do I mean by that? Well, if I was to ask you, how much of you do you put into your stories when you communicate with organisations? There are very few folk put any stories into anything when they communicate. But do you know yourself well enough, and do you trust yourself well enough to put your own thing into the stories you communicate with? Now, I know guys, and I'm talking about all guys, not just male guys. I know guys that are brilliant, absolutely brilliant individuals. They have progressed to chief executive level or even chairman level, and they never talk about their own life. They keep work and life very, very separate. Now, I think that was fine in the 80s, in the 70s. I think that's changing now. I think people want to know more about their boss. They want to know what the CEO does in her personal life. They want to know if she's into charity or if she's into football or rugby or cricket, God forbid, or whatever it is they do. And I very rarely see people actually saying to their group, this is something I struggle with. They have this sort of armor plating on where they have this almost superhero approach to being a leader. I want to see that change. I think that is a real problem. And if leaders, well, it's not just leaders, everybody needs to get to be able to communicate their own stories, because that way you're authentic. You're authentic. Now, I was thinking about in this model, I'm not going to do it, but in the fact at the bottom here, I was actually going to use FACT and one of the A was going to be authentic, but I don't think I'm going to do that. But I think it's something that's so important, and so few people actually understand how important it is, that I think we need to spend much, much more time thinking about it. So that's what I think about roles. And I don't know if you have any views on that. But you get a lot of people who are terrified of talking about their beliefs, their feelings, their motives, etc. And I think it's quite sad. But good communicators are able to do it, and they're able to do it in a way that they're confident. I remember catching out a couple of chief executives of mine. One was in construction, the other one was in education. I think Heather, you're here, you might know one of the people I'm talking about. And one of the chief executives was a liar. I mean, he was an absolute liar, and people constantly spotted him telling lies. And it wasn't fibs, it was lies about how he felt and about what he was doing and how what he believed about the organisation. He had no relatedness with the organisation. The people couldn't stand the man. And after a little time, as often happens with bullies and liars in the corporate world, they eventually lose and get kicked out. And he did. But I said to him, stop it. You need to be more relatable. You need to be authentic. But he wasn't able to do it. The one person I know that has been able to do it, and it's quite an interesting story actually, and I won't tell the whole story, but Timson's, John Timson, who's the third generation chief executive of Timson's, the shoe company. When he got the job at Timson's, and I met him and worked with him for about 3 months, and have since shared a stage with him a couple of times. He's quite a character. He's not always appropriate with his stories, but he's quite a character. And one of the things he talks about is, I think the whole thing's got too busy. I don't like complexity. I want to simplify this business. So you know what he did? He did that. He took away all the SAP, doesn't matter what that means, all the big tech from the shops. He went into a warehouse and he bought 4,000 Victorian tills, and he put them into the shops, and he said this is the rules. This is it at Timson, because he doesn't like complexity. He says, right, put the money in the till and look the part. That's how long his story is. Put the money in the till and look the part. And when you think about it, I don't know if you know this, but roughly 40% of the employees at Timson's are ex-cons. They've got more ex-cons than any other organisation in Europe. And he has 2% attrition rate. I mean, it's astonishing. And he lives and breathes his beliefs, his what he thinks his role is in that organisation. I'll tell you some other stories about him another time. Maybe make your toes curl, because I know him quite well now. So let me just check the chat, guys. Oh, I made a spelling mistake. Thanks, Pete. Oh dear, you caught me out. Although I'm quite hungry, so maybe that was a subliminal message, Pete. Excellent. Thanks for letting me know that. Yeah. So What are we getting here? Heather says Peter knows that comedy is all about drawing pictures in here. Absolutely. For those of you who don't know, we've got a full-on comedian on here, who's a fantastic comedian. I'd love you to come on the show sometime, Peter, and tell us some of your stories. And then the third one that I want to just have you think about in terms of corporate comms is this idea of tension. There is no point in sending out a message. Well, you can, everything's great, but that's not kind of what organisations are like. There are always things going on in organisations, and a lot of those things cause conflict and lead to tension. And I've had some hairy experiences around this, mainly with performance management, where I don't believe in performance management. And as a former HR director, that used to cause terrible problems for my bosses, because there is no evidence that it works anywhere in the world, anywhere. Certainly not the way we're currently doing it. And but nevertheless, I used to communicate that. I used to say to my board that this is a waste of time. All we're doing is using it to distribute money. It's not motivating anybody. In fact, it's doing the opposite. And you go up to Jimmy and say, "Hey, Jimmy, you've done really well this year. You've performed average." And you expect them to go home happy. Well, lots of companies are now finding out to their cost that doesn't really work. So I think communicating that and being honest, and I used to say that, I used to say, look, I am not comfortable with this. There is no evidence that this is working, no matter how much we look into it. I can't create stories around this because there's no evidence. There's no facts that this is actually working. And I think creating that tension, now I did that mainly in the boardroom, but I've done it out to bigger company, like I did it at British Gas with 80,000 employees. I was very honest with them. Things like saying, I don't know the answer to this. Because you know what people do? They give you ideas, if you're honest. So I think that, admitting that there's something happening in your own head that you're not sure about is actually, I know this is very trendy, all the Brené Brown fans, etc. But demonstrating that vulnerability is actually really important and can be really, really useful and can help you land your story in your organisation. So let me just check if there's any other thought. Thanks for your feedback, Peter. That's brilliant. He's saying any time. Yeah. Oh, hello, Andy. Nice to see you. Hi. I hope you can hear me okay. And so that's the sort of third one. So let me just see what Doug's written here. Here's Doug's. I started wondering if identifying the villain in your story is key for those to ensure that staff don't create their own story villain and internalize conflict or even becoming the villain. That's an interesting observation. I think in that context, Doug, I've often seen people having the other as a villain. It's a bit like very basic. I think this is maybe what you're saying. And I've done this, if you're working with large audiences, if you're working in Glasgow and you say, right, I want the Glasgow Rangers fans on that side of the room and the Glasgow Celtic fans on that side of the room and the Partick Thistle fans at the back of the room. You get 49% there, 49% there, and 2% at the back. And within seconds, they're forming like tribes almost. They're forming groups and they're hurling abuse at each other but being friendly with each other. So I think you're right, because they immediately then brand that other group, the other, as villain. And it's quite funny when I worked in consulting for 12 years in all the big consultancy firms. And it was quite funny because you'd stand up on a pitch and you'd have a go at, Deloitte. Then you'd go and work at Deloitte and you'd have a go at KPMG, who you'd just been working for. Then you'd go to Atos and then you slag off Deloitte and Accenture, So you're right in that context. But I think you're meaning a bit deeper than that, Doug, are you? Let me know if you're meaning a bit deeper than that. But I think that is true. We do create villains, and you can avoid that by saying who they are. But people will naturally do that. The them and us thing. Look, we've experienced it, haven't we, with Scottish independence? We've experienced it with Brexit. We're experiencing it with Trump, Trumpistan. But we tell what angle I come at it from. So it's something that we do tend to create villains, and it's rarely that clear. That would be a hell of an icebreaker to watch. Yeah, absolutely, Pete. Imagine doing it in Liverpool. You do it in London. I've done it in London, and it is great fun. I did it with. I was doing the technology run up to the Olympic Games in London, and we had 400 different companies in the room, Pete, and they were all from all over the UK. And I did it there, and it was brilliant. It was in this massive. don't know how to describe it. It was like it was a fish factory, and on the roof, the guy had created a conference suite, and it was stinking of fish. But we got them all in this room, and I did the football exercise. It was hilarious, and people were complaining that, I support Burnley, and you didn't mention us, and it was hilarious. So yeah, it's a pretty good icebreaker, but it shows the tribal nature. It shows that we actually have these things within us, as Doug suggested, to project the villain onto it. And thanks, Doug, for that. We project the villain onto it. So that's the kind of the first three things I want to talk about. I'm not going to go into any more on that model just now, but I'm building it through the weeks, and hopefully we'll start to internalize it. But as always, in the last 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. And obviously, if you've got any questions, let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. But I'm going to tell you one that I think is a secret. And I'm kind of, don't tell anybody, okay? Because this is I think this is magic dust, this first one. And then I'm going to go to the artifact wall, and I'm going to tell you a little story from the artifact wall. But this is the first one, and this is one, and actually Heather Wright was on, I don't know if you're still here, Heather, but I was working with Heather in her company when this actually happened. So Heather, it's probably 20 years ago, Heather, and I was head of HR for Scottish and Newcastle, and I was working in Manchester. Those of you who know Manchester, there's a road called the Princess Parkway, goes into Manchester, otherwise known as Beirut. It's pretty rough. And I was responsible for a brewery there called the Royal Brewery. It's since been renamed. I think it's called what was it called? The Harp Brewery, and I think now it's called the Heineken Brewery. It was one of the biggest breweries in the world, certainly one of the biggest in Europe. And I was working with various consultancy businesses because we had quite big challenges, and one of them was Heather. One of them was Heather's company. But the guy that this story comes from, a guy who I've probably mentioned before, one of my mentors called Jim, and he was helping me because it was a big job for me. I jumped from being I was in a big corporate, British Gas, but coming into a company like Scottish and Newcastle is a whole other kettle of fish compared to the big, safe, massive corporate environments where you can hide quite easily if you make a mistake, but you can't in a company like Scottish and Newcastle. They're not nearly as big, and HR had quite a visible presence in all the sites. Actually, Scottish Courage, the brewing part that I was head of HR for. Anyway, I was working with a guy called Alan, who was the boss of this particular brewery. So it was the second biggest brewery in Europe, and we produced everything from Kronenberg to Foster's and Guinness, but don't tell anybody that. You're not supposed to know that. But we did. We made Guinness. We were what's called the Emergency Guinness Brewery, and I was given the role because my boss Al was quite keen on swapping the board members round. So although I was working in HR, I was given an engineering job to do. And that engineering job was to get a water tower fitted in the brewery. Because what happens is when breweries get to a certain size, anyone worked in brewing will know this, the biggest cost in brewing is water. So what you tend to do is you drill down to find water. And we needed, I think it was about 8 million, don't quote me, I can't remember the numbers. It was 5 or 8 million, something like that, million quid to build this water tower. And the guy who was responsible for the budgets had the best job title ever. He was called Steve, and his job title was Global Operations Director, God. G-O-D. And God very rarely paid a visitation to our brewery, but it just so happened that God was coming one day, and I was responsible for chatting to him and seeing if I could get this money out of him. So I'd spent ages, gathering evidence and trying to, make sense of how I would, pitch to him. I wasn't as experienced at pitching at this point. This was early in my career, but nevertheless, I'd done a lot to try and, get ready for the meeting. And he walked into my office. My office was quite big, and it had a filing cabinet sort of here as you walked in the door, and he put his arm on here and he's looking at me, and behind me I had a coffee table, and behind that my desk was off to the right here. I had a coffee table, and on the coffee table was the report, but above it though on the wall was a picture of me. And actually, if I'd thought about it, where is it? Oh, I must have put it in another room. I've still got it. It was me standing outside Tynecastle Park in Edinburgh, which is where Heart and Midlothian play, with my long hair, leather jacket, and Iron Maiden t-shirt on, right? Very proud to be a Hearts fan. And he went, "Oh, you're a Hearts fan?" He said, "I'm a Celtic fan," right? Off we went, chat, right? About football. Got to the end of the half hour. Remember, this is God. He doesn't have a lot of time. He's got quite a big remit. And off God went. I didn't talk to him about the water tower. And looking back in hindsight, I get that funny face on. I didn't think about it at the time. I thought I'd done well at the time. I thought I'd created rapport with God. But in to see Al, and I said, look, this is what happened. Told him we'd got chatting. Hadn't really got to the water tower, and he was bloody mad. He said, look, I'm not happy. You should have got to that. That's not acceptable. We're under pressure here. We're going to have to think about a way of dealing with this. So he sent me home with the proverbial tail between my legs. Pete's just saying, I love the idea that there was an emergency Guinness factory. There still is. They don't talk about it, but there is. Brewing's not that much of a mystery. They like to make it a mystery. There's recipes for all these things. I'll talk to you about Guinness anytime you like. It's the myth of Dublin is a myth. Anyway, and so I went home and I was a bit upset. I think I was 26, so I was young, a bit daft, and said to my wife, I said, I've screwed up. And she said, you should phone Jim. So I phoned Jim, who's my mentor. And Jim said, I think I've got an idea. I was like, and he said, first of all, he said, yeah, you're a pillock. He should have got to the point. Went, right, thanks for the feedback, Jim. He said, no, what you should have been doing, though, he said, what you need to do was polish your shoes. Now, I don't know what you think about that, what you think it means. Some of you may have heard me speak about this before, but I was like, what's wrong with my shoes? I had no idea what he was talking about. And basically what he meant was this, and it was full on Derren Brown. I got a call 2 days later from God's office saying that God was coming back. Pure luck. And Steve would like to speak to me again. So I was like, right, time to polish your shoes. So what I did was I absolutely went through every inch of the brewery to make sure that the minute God entered the brewery gates to get into my office, to come up the stairs, then go onto the lift, because there was stairs and there was a lift. And when he got into my office, and when he was in my office, everything that was around him was about this water tower. Everything. So when he got into the building, he opened the swing, the sort of glass doors. There was a notice board. And on there, I'd got the print department to draw something about I made it up. I wouldn't do it now, of course, but, I put some investment over time, and then I had a sort of profit line, and then a big arrow going like this, and a red arrow pointing to with, water savings. And he saw that as he was coming into the lift. There was something similar in the lift. He walked into my office. My assistant at the time, the brilliant Val, she was amazing. She still is. She's an HR director for who is it, Virgin these days. She had helped me go through the report that we'd had commissioned about the water, highlighted every single detail, the key details. Not only that, we've got these little special post-its, the arrow ones. So when he saw it, he opened it. The arrow was pointing straight at the text, and she had highlighted all the key text. We'd then taken the text out, the key bits, we'd laminated it onto A4 paper, put it on the desk. I'd moved the football picture from the wall and put it above my desk, and put another flip up there with more details about the water tower. Bang! I got the water tower in about 10 minutes. That was my first real use of polish your shoes. And it was amazing, because it was just about preparing the room, getting ready really, but preparing myself as well. 10 years later, I was given the job of training and working with the KPMG Salesforce, and with the Atos Salesforce, Deloitte Salesforce, Capgemini Salesforce. And I taught all of them polish your shoes. And if you ever came in as a client into our office to have a pitch done by us, we were pitching you for work, you didn't have a chance, because we were so forensically prepared that they walked in and they saw themselves. Really simple examples. Working at M&S, guess what we were all wearing? Yeah, we're working with the Royal Mail. I'm really proud of this one. It was a £300 million procurement system going into the Royal Mail. What we did was we sat down in an office and said, right, how do we polish our shoes for this one? And it wasn't me, one of the other guys said, well, what do the Royal Mail do? Well, they deal with letters, don't they? What sort of letters? Between people and between people. So what we did was we got a 300, I'm not making that, this is completely true, a £300 million proposal handwritten by professional scribes. We had them before they even opened the envelope, which was a big thing, right? We had them even before they opened the envelope, because we polished our shoes. That's the sort of corporate story, right? That's a corporate story, because that's there's an issue, there's a problem, there's a communication challenge. And we thought, right, how can we really get under the skin? You don't need to do all this, these complex profiling things that people do. You just get into their world, their environment. Because you know what? They're not going to change their behavior, like the heart attack story I started with. But if you change the environment, it can help them see things differently. And that's why I think stories are so powerful. I hope you enjoyed that one. There is going to be 2 more. I'm over again. I always go over when I'm in the areas that I'm particularly passionate about. I maybe cut one of the stories. But any thoughts on that? Any thoughts? I like the fact that you like the emergency brewery. That's quite good. I'm too young to have worked with you 20 years ago. Honest. No, you're not. Well, we were both 10 though. But I'll tell you, I'm going to cut one because I have gone over. I'm sorry, I get really enthusiastic about this stuff, but I'm going to finish on one that I think really exemplifies that beginnings of this anecdote model that I've got. And I'm going to go to my anecdote wall again and use. Some of you may have spotted there's a new artifact on my wall here, and it's this. And what happened with the superhero thing was really sweet, but actually pretty transformational for me, because I didn't expect it. I was working for Barclays Bank, and it was about 18 months ago, so before lockdown, obviously. And anyone who's worked at Barclays will know on the top floor at Barclays in their tower out in Canary Wharf, they've got it's like a greenhouse, and it's the training and development area. It's a huge thing. You can probably get about 400 people in it, and we had 100. And this was their graduate intake as well as their sort of young career manager types. And I was thinking about, again, back to what you said earlier about icebreakers, things you can do. And this is a great icebreaker, and it's not mine. I mean, I got this from a guy who runs an acting company where they use artistic training. And Doug, you might know some of it because Doug used to be an actor. And this is an exercise that they quite often do in acting training. So I got them to do it. And I stood up on the stage, had the microphone. I said, right, I want you to turn to your neighbour, and I want you to talk to them about what your favourite movie is. Now, if we had more time, we could do it tonight for real, but we won't. Just bear with me. I know some of you are already thinking, because you can't help it, can you? What's my favourite movie? So they all went in the room, bush list, great energy, everybody's getting involved. And I had an assistant with me, and him and I were walking through the group, butting in, what's your favourite movie? And to be honest, they were young, so it was like Fast and Furious, and there's quite a lot of Star Wars. And I walked up to these 2 girls, and I reckon they must have been 19, maybe 18, 19, young girls. And they're really having a good conversation. And one girl was a big, she must have been 5'11", maybe even 6 feet. But she was also that shape. She was quite a large girl. The other girl was the opposite. She was probably 4'11" and like that, a tiny little thing. So one like this and one like this. And they're chatting away. And I said, look, do you mind if I interrupt? And have a butt in to your conversation. And I said, yes, of course. And I was like, oh, great. And I said, right. So I said to the tall girl, I said, what was your favourite film? My emotions are unbelievable with these stories. Sorry. And she said, my favourite film is Shrek. And I was like, oh, and I didn't know what to say. And I said, oh, why? And I just said it. And she said, well, because I think I look like Shrek. Now, I had that moment, guys. I almost laughed, right? I didn't. I'll tell you how I did that some other time. There's a way you can stop yourself from laughing. Anyway, Pete's used to that when his audience doesn't laugh. But I almost laughed, and I went, oh, why? And she said, because I look like Shrek, and I think people treat me like Shrek, like I'm a monster. My heart sank. I have to be honest, despite having all these years experience, Heather, I was struggling for what to say. But then this little girl, small in stature girl, she wasn't little, she was small in stature, looked up at her friend like that and she said, you're not Shrek, you're a superhero. And I was like, I'm not going to swear because I know there's some kids watch this, but I was like, absolutely unbelievable. And what she did to that girl in that moment was transformational. That girl, you could see the big girl going, whew, And all that was a little bit of feedback from, obviously, from a friend, right? That story, I tell that story all the time. You know, if you see me on stage in a keynote in about 10 years' time, I'll still be telling that story, because it sums up how quickly you can change someone's state. It sums up how sometimes people have got such, you know, low self-esteem that they see themselves like a monster. I mean, it's desperately sad, but what a story, eh? What a story. Completely true. And it's something that this is why I get so passionate about story, and why I'm going over by 50 minutes now. I think this is something that everybody should be doing. And I'll finish, before I look at the comments, there are a few comments flying around, but I'll finish with this. I think at work, particularly in a senior position, but you know what, in any position, and you know what, maybe even I'm contradicting myself here, maybe it's more important when you're a junior person, capture your stories. I said it before, be an archaeologist of your own life. You know, have a sales ledger of stories, not of, you know, profit. Yeah. Gather the stories so that you can tell those stories, like the ones I've told when you meet other clients. The story about the post office, when I go to the Olympic Games, I can tell that story. They look at you and they go, wow. They just can't help it, because it's unique, it's emotional, it shows empathy for the client. You're an absolute winner, guys, if you'd use this methodology. Stories are absolutely critical, and I promise I'll come back to this and finish that equation. Once I've finished the equation, coming up the equation, I'll make sure you my workings along the way, as one of my friends Joe would say. But I think that we're onto something here that is really powerful for the people are tritely calling the new norm. I think storytelling, we need to revert to being what we really are, the natural us. Now, let me just look at some of the questions and the observations. Peter's upset that I slagged him off a minute ago about his audience. Well, Pete, you know, truth hurts. Right, Pete says, Polish Your Shoes is a great story. We used to do it under a harsh performance management regime when we were expecting an inspection. Just for some context, I know Peter, and Peter was a senior police officer for many years, a very good senior police officer, I believe. And he said, they were brutal, but we managed the route the boss took and populated it appropropriately. He knew, but it worked a charm. Yeah, I get that. I absolutely get that. I mean, I think that's why it's quite good to label it, Pete. That's why it was Jim got the idea, not me, but that idea of architecting what you're actually, how you're creating the stories is quite important. And be an archaeologist for your own life is pretty, yeah. I mean, this is something I've been encouraging myself to do. And I've got 400 stories now. And I promise one of the artifacts I will use is one of my story banks, because I recorded a diary every day on audio tape. One of my heroes is Tony Benn, the great Labour politician. Whether you're into Labour or not doesn't matter. He was a great genius politician. And he recorded a diary every day. I did it for 20 years, and it's just down there. And I started it when I was very young, actually before I was at university, and I did it for 20 years. It's changed now. I use different methods of doing it now from the old tapes, but nevertheless, it's so important. It takes a long time to go through it though when you're 50, but you know, it really is important. So thanks. I'm glad you liked that, Peter. Any other final comments? Let me just check my YouTube friends. Gosh. I really want to know who these people are. I know Joe's there and Doug's there, but I would really like to know who these other people are. Okay. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you found that interesting. It's the first time I've started to release this idea I've got about, you know, why I'm using the word artifact, because I'm quite keen to come up with a model that you can go away with and use. So thanks very much for tuning in. Next week, it could go on for 5 hours, so it's a good job it gets recorded, isn't it? Next week, I'm going to talk about art. I'm going to talk about the power of art in story and how, I've been doing this for 20 years now. I've been using art for 20 years to simplify, to clarify, to remove that noise, but we create stories by using art. So that's going to be the focus next week. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them either now or next week. But I hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed it. It's been I got to tell some of my favourite stories. I'm not sorry that I prattled on. These are good stories. And I hope that they give you some ideas that you can bounce off and create your own methods around them, because they work. They just work. So thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to have one last double check, make sure I'm not missing anything. Cheers, guys. I'll see you next week. And this was Scott Carter, and this was Artifact Storytelling, the art and science of it, live. As you can tell, it was definitely live.